you doing, everybody? I'm Ken Bykoff, and welcome to O'Neill Speaks, the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. One of the first actions of the new U.S. presidential administration was an executive order establishing the Department of Government Efficiency, which has been tasked with reviewing and reducing federal spending. Since the executive order was signed January 20th, the headlines have flown on a near daily basis about cuts, reforms, and mass layoffs of federal workers. The actions are controversial, immediately triggering a host of lawsuits, with some of the department's actions already being reversed by federal court decisions. The effort has introduced rampant uncertainty into the federal government bureaucracy, and the shifting sands of the future has also brought many areas of the government to a near standstill. All the headlines about cuts and reforms grab a lot of attention, but overlooked in the winds of change are the essential roles government and its programs play in our day-to-day lives. We're joined today by Professor of Practice Paul Helmke to talk about this issue. Paul is the director of the Civic Leaders Center at the O'Neill School and is also the former president and CEO of the Brady Center Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. Paul also is a former three-term Republican mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here, Ken.
So first and foremost, what do most people get wrong when it comes to the role government plays in our lives?
I think people sometimes approach this too simplistically. In my lifetime, we've had sort of the approach from Lyndon Johnson that government is the solution to our problems, and we've had the approach from Ronald Reagan that government is the problem. And what I try to tell people, it's government isn't the solution or the problem. Government is us, and it's what we make of it. And if we wanted to operate more efficiently, we can do that by following the constitutional processes. If we like what it's doing, we can support that by following the constitutional processes. But to treat government like it's something foreign from us, which both saying it's the solution or the problem, I think that's the wrong approach. It's us, we are the government, and it's what we make out of it.
What does the government really do well? What is that bureaucracy and all the programs? What does it do well?
Well, one of the, first of all, we need to talk about government at a number of levels. We've got the federal level, we've got the state level, we've got the local level. And I really think, I've dealt with folks at all levels quite a bit over the years. I think government actually works fairly well most of the time. People are attacking bureaucrats now and the deep state supposedly, but most people that I've worked with are serious and committed to doing a good job. They're the folks that graduate from the O'Neill School. They're the folks that that have given up probably higher incomes in order to serve the public, to serve the community. And I think we need to celebrate those people. But again, you can find problems at any level too. There's no single organization that is 100% efficient all of the time. Sometimes somebody slacks off. Sometimes you've got some redundancies. But the solution is to correct those, to fix those when you find them. But so bottom line, I think government actually does things fairly well. At the federal level, it's really kept us pretty safe over the last 80 years. I think the post-World War II world order has been a pretty good one.
Sure.
We've made some mistakes over the years, but it's been pretty solid. My son-in-law was in the U.S. Army for 25 years, and I was able to visit him at his postings throughout Europe and follow him when he was in Iraq. We did a pretty good job with the service that our military does in keeping us safe. One of the first jobs I ever had was as a mail deliverer during the summer. The Social Security checks, when I was late delivering them, people were on their porch angry. We run the Social Security agency pretty efficiently. It's now deposited automatically to my bank account and to other people's bank accounts. So you don't have to worry about the mail person being late that day because it was raining. Most of the time, when things are going smoothly, we take government for granted, and that's the catch. It's only when there's a problem that we notice anything, and that's when we need to say, let's fix that, and let's not tear the whole thing down. Other point I want to make, though, is the local government really is where people are getting their daily services, and people need to make that distinction. I remember when I was mayor, occasionally there were some governmental shutdowns, federal governmental shutdowns, and I said, with the federal government shuts down, as long as we're not in a war, and as long as the Social Security check's getting deposited, most people don't care. If state government shuts down, most people aren't going to notice it. But if local government shuts down, if there's not a fire department to respond, if there's not a police car to respond, if the traffic lights don't work, people are going to notice right away. So government impacts us directly at the local level, and we need to celebrate that more too.
Back to kind of at a federal level. what does it do well outside of you mentioned Social Security, you mentioned the post office, and those are also two of the areas that have kind of shown up in the headlines.
Too.
Yeah.
The overall, it really, I think it does most things fairly well. That's not to say it's perfect.
Sure.
It certainly isn't. But we need to remember the things that government is doing are things that we asked it to do.
Right.
We asked it to do through our elected officials in Congress who created these departments. They created them for the reason that people needed help or they needed to work jointly on some things. Government does that all fairly well. I think where I can spot some areas that they don't do well. I think sometimes they try too much of a one-size-fits-all approach. I think sometimes they haven't adjusted for new realities and new technologies. But the overall, I think, goals of our government, the overall things that we've set it up for, the overall responsibilities, the main responsibilities they hold, they really do a pretty decent job. The people that are government are the people, again, that we elect. Right. And the people that we know that work in those bureaucracies, they're not some faceless citizen. They're our neighbors for the most part.
Sure. Is there an issue with bloat in the government?
I think,
and I know that's somewhat of an opinion that question, but do you feel that there is some bloat?
I think any organization, whether it's private sector, public sector, or not-for-profit sector, and I've worked in all three sectors. Generally, you can find some areas where you can trim, but it's not easy. I mean, and this is the thing. I think what's happening now at some level is people are trying to take shortcuts, and they're being a little lazy about it. I mean, doing this properly takes some time. You've got to go in and you've got to say, I think overall we're a little bloated. We spend too much. Let's look at things department by department or agency by agency. Let's ask the agencies, the people that know what's going on, where would you cut if you had to cut 5% or 10% or 25%? And if you can't tell us that, and if you'd be more efficient by hiring more people, which is a strong argument that actually you can make at the IRS, sure, that they will return for every person you hire, for every dollar you spend, you're going to bring more back in terms of cracking down on people that are cheating the rest of us by cheating on their
sure
taxes. So you need to go through that agency by agency, department by department thing. And again, you'll find I think you're always going to find some issues, some departments, some initiatives that are probably outdated. I'm no expert in agriculture. Don't quote me on this. But I've read over the years that some of the programs that we set up in the 1930s to deal with the Dust Bowl and the Depression and all that we still have then that are sending money to farmers not to plant things. Maybe those can be looked at. Again, maybe you need some of this stuff still, but let's look to make sure that what we're doing today fits with what our needs are today and what our goals are today and what our concerns are today, not what they were from 100 years ago type thing. And I think you can go through other departments that are doing the same thing. We need to constantly be making things more updated. When I was mayor, and this moves it back to the local level, but it's sort of my experience. I came in and there were things I thought I could get rid of. Or that I could significantly downsize. But then when I talked to the people that were actually doing it, and I talked to the people that were benefiting from it, and I talked to the people that dealt with it, a lot of times I realized, maybe it was just replacing a person or two or changing an area of focus or two. It wasn't getting rid of the whole department. But that takes time, that takes work.
It seems to me that what comes to mind when you talk about programs that have been in existence for several decades and maybe could be changed, that happens in other areas of government as well. You look at just laws that are on the books that, you end up reading about, a funny thing like, say, the mayor of someplace in Kentucky gets 3 pigs when he's elected. Nobody actually does it anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's a situation where things get stacked over time, and some programs are there. They're more legacy. To me, that is, it's not unusual to be when you're talking about a country that is coming up on 250 years old.
Yeah, it's and every now and then you'll see a city or a state or a nation that's going to do these reviews. We need to do those more often. And that should really be a regular part of what we do. Maybe it's not automatically sunsetting some things, but basically saying every X number of years, let's go in and review what's going on. Again, the private sector is doing that sort of thing. This is one other distinction, that the private sector and the public sector are very different. The goal in the private sector is to make money, usually quickly, for the stockholders. The people that have the most stock are the ones that care the most. They have to pay taxes, supposedly. They try to make a profit for their shareholders. The public sector, we don't need to make a profit. The public sector, we don't just serve or shouldn't just be serving the richest person. We should be serving everybody. And you should look at these things differently. But be efficient about it, too. Let's go back and study things. I used to joke that when people would complain to me about some bureaucratic thing that the city was doing, I'd say, you're complaining about it. You're dealing with it just in this one incident. I'm dealing with the red tape every day. But it took a lot of pushback. Some of it was saying this regulation doesn't really need to be interpreted that way. This law really doesn't mean what you think it means. We can have some flexibility. We can make things fit the moment and then fit the concern. And that's what we need to do at all levels.
Well, that was going to be my next question. You brought it up about the private and public viewpoint on this thing, to where there are a lot of people that think the government should be run like a business because they hear about deficits, they hear about debts and everything that goes along with it. But those are two very, very different things. Because like you say, one is designed to make money and to profit, and the other one is there to serve. And so there's a very different kind of view of that.
Right. And people, I think, sometimes oversimplify again things. It's like, government should run like a household. I run my household on a budget. I have to balance my budget. Well, technically you don't. If you've got a mortgage on your house, you are way in debt.
Right.
If you've got a car loan, you are in debt. If you're carrying your credit card balances, you're in debt. And nobody's saying you got to stop that right now.
Right.
Nobody's saying you have to pay cash for your house or cash for your car. But so government borrows just like we borrow. And the interesting thing with government is generally it borrows from itself. It borrows from us. And so when we're paying interest, and again, I'm very concerned about the long range, the federal debt, federal deficit, all these things. We need to take steps on those. But those steps are a combination of spending less and sometimes spending more, sometimes taxing less, sometimes taxing more. Instead, we've gotten this simplistic, like we can never raise another tax and we can never hire another person.
Right.
Again, hire more IRS people, you're going to bring more money in. Raise some taxes on the very wealthy, and more money's going to come in. I remember back in the 80s, there was something, an economist, Arthur Laffer, who pushed this idea, the Laffer curve, that if you tax too much, receipts are going to drop. And I still think that makes sense. But it's also, if you tax too little, you're going to bring in less money too. And, it's putting this all in context that's the hard part. Government is not easy. The problems that we face as a country, whether it's local level, state level, national level, internationally, are complicated. And it takes a lot of people with a lot of experience who talk to a lot of everyday people to figure out how to do things right. And I think sometimes we want immediate changes and we want instant results, and we don't explore the nuance and the work that needs to go into this.
We've touched on this a little bit, but I think most people would agree that there's nothing improper at looking at programs as they come and reviewing their efficiency and everything that goes along with it. What is kind of the proper way to go about that? It's kind of, you hear the analogy of a scalpel as opposed to a bomb. What is?
Well, I've always mistrusted radical solutions to complex problems. And, if somebody's got a leg that's bothering them, you just don't go in with the saw and say, cut the leg off.
Right.
You figure out, why is the leg hurting? Can we, is there a cyst we need to take out? Is there a little thing we need to do with the knee or the hip? We don't cut the whole thing off first. I mean, that's too radical. And I think part of what we're seeing now is a radical approach to things. Let's just cut that all out. And if it's important, then we'll recreate it somehow. Well, you don't cut the leg off and hope it's going to grow back. You look, you study, why are we having problems? What are we spending money on? Why are we spending money? Are we spending it efficiently? And if we're not, then let's fix those things. Again, we're taking, I'm afraid, the lazy way out and the radical way out. And I think oftentimes the reckless, sloppy way out. I mean, it's when you say, oh, gee, we didn't mean to cut those folks that oversee our nuclear weapons. That makes me a little nervous, or admitting, gee, we're not always going to get it right if we do X, Y, Z. Take it slowly. We've got some times. If there's problems, we can fix them. But the so it's not taking the radical approach. The other thing is Congress needs to do its job. If there's one area of government that concerns me the most, it is not the bureaucracy, it's Congress. And this is both parties are at fault for this sort of thing. Congress is the one who created these, wrote these laws, created these agencies, and has oversight responsibilities of them. Congress every year is supposed to do a budget. And the budget, usually it's like 13 different budgets that they look at. They're supposed to have committees that hold hearings,
Right.
that ask questions. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this efficiently? Could you do this better? Could you do this at less cost? And then after these hearings, they mark up their part of the budget, and that becomes part of the budget bill that we're supposed to pass by September 30th. We haven't done that. That's called normal order. We haven't done that in years, and whether it's Democrats running the House and in the Congress or Republicans running the House. And it's because they have dropped the ball, Congress has dropped the ball, that you see this pressure on the executive branch, Musk and Doge and whatever, to try to fix things. The way that things need to be fixed is through Congress. And if Doge, whatever, is coming up with things that they think should be cut, then send that to Congress for them to look at it and cut it. But we've had such an ineffective, dysfunctional Congress for at least the last 30 years,
Sure.
it seems like, that they're not doing their job. And who's at fault? We all are. We're the ones that elect them. Let's and when they get there, they don't care about legislating. Too many of them don't care about legislating and governing, but they're concerned about, I want to get that. I want to get the hits. I want to get the follows. I want to get the likes. I want to get the media clip, and that's all they're doing. They're posturing for folks back home instead of legislating, instead of doing their job. And I think if we start saying that's where the problem is, Congress, not the bureaucrats, because Congress are the ones who created the bureaucrats.
Sure. Well, and as those the years pass, and you don't have normal order that we had, you lose that institutional knowledge of how to do that.
Right.
And it
right.
seems that we might be at that point
I
now.
know, it's sad. I meet with Lee Hamilton, one of the namesakes for the Hamilton Luger School. He's in his early 90s now, still very sharp. And I talked to him about what it was like when he got elected to Congress in 1964, and he served to the late 90s. And they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Again, under Republicans and under Democrats. But now it seems our elected officials are more concerned about going back home, raising money, getting the publicity shots, getting the media clips, and instead of doing their job. That's who we should be focusing our attentions on.
You're somebody who has dealt with these sorts of issues at the executive level as mayor. With so much going on in just a city, how difficult is it to be able to kind of find the time to attack these kind of issues when it comes on? I know you have to hire people to do it. You can't do it yourself. But how much of a challenge is it, because you're being pulled in so many different directions, to figure out where you have to kind of focus your attention to be able to govern in any kind of meaningful way?
I joke sometimes when I think back when I was mayor and when I talk to other mayors, just don't sleep. You have to. But I think the main thing is, again, you have to get good people around you who are responsive. You need to be able to ask good questions to make sure they're doing what you want them to do and they're staying on track. And you need to ask questions about why we're doing things. It's easy to, somebody says, gee, we saw 3 extra workers standing around when one guy's digging the hole. I mean, I've seen things posted on social media in the last couple of weeks saying this is what we got to get rid of. And you start thinking, do you really need all those people? Well, then you find out that we had somebody die because they didn't do when you're digging a hole, digging a trench, putting in a utility line, if you don't shore it up properly, that can fall in and kill somebody. And so now safety requirements require that you need extra people there to dig the hole, extra people to be there if there's a problem. And, maybe it could be one less person. But, find these things out before saying just give one guy a shovel or one person a shovel and let them dig the hole.
Yeah.
No, that's not the safe way to do things. You also, you find out that when you're responding to an incident, maybe they don't know how much they're going to need, type thing. So you send more than are needed, but that's better than sending less than you need sometimes too. And it's just try to, understand. And, nobody's perfect. There's nobody that isn't. I mean, everybody makes mistakes sometimes, and we need to realize that's true for our governmental officials as well as our private sector officials as well as the rest of us. And let's cut people a little slack, set the goals, figure out where we want to go, and figure out how to get there without just yelling at each other, without just picking on each other. I think we can get it done, but government is us.
How much of the misunderstanding of government, I guess, is people having hard opinions about things that they don't really know about? That it's just kind of their opinion, like you mentioned, a construction site and three guys are watching while one, they don't understand. They've never worked on a road crew. They don't understand. All they know is what they see when they're driving by. How much of the misunderstanding of what government does come from people forming opinions without any real information?
I think that's a lot of it, but that's not necessarily their fault either. And actually, this is one of the other things I fault government on. I don't think government does a very good job of explaining what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that's got to be the job of the elected officials as much as anything. You don't expect a bureaucrat to come out here and defend what they're doing. Everyone's going to mistrust that person. The people who established that department, that entity, that goal needs to be able to step up and say, here's why we're doing this. Here's why this is a good thing. Here's why you might not see the results now, but you will see them later. And that's true whether it's the local level, state level, or national level. People need to explain, we've actually got a good system here. Not perfect, but it's a good system. It needs to be, we need to tweak some things. We need to adjust some things. But let's do that instead of tearing it all down. And government just needs to do a better job explaining this sort of thing. It's, it's like apparently there was some protests a few years back, and people were saying, keep your government needs to keep their hands off my Social Security.
Right.
Social Security was created by government
Right.
because we wanted to take care of people, not a Ponzi scheme, by the way. We need to explain things better to people. Where I think part of the problem has come in is no one wants to defend government. And it's particularly in politics. And this has gotten worse over the last 30 years, I think, too. Negative. I never liked negative campaign ads, still don't like negative campaign ads. You talk to consultants and they're going to say those are more effective. Now that we have all sorts of nearly unlimited outside money, they can run all the negative ads they want. They don't care what the candidate thinks. But what the negative ads usually do in the broader sense, they're tearing down government. They're saying, your money's wasted here. This person's a crook. This is a fraud. This is a waste of time. And again, that might help somebody get elected. It might help give them market share, but it lowers the trust in government. And that's why I think every year we're seeing less and less trust in government and governmental institutions. And the line I usually give is that if fast food, if McDonald's said don't eat at Wendy's because you're going to get deathly ill, and they flashed up some headline from somebody, that might give McDonald's greater market share, but eventually nobody's going to go eat fast food.
Right.
Or if Airline A said don't fly this airline, they crash more often. Yeah, that might help the first airline, but eventually no one's going to fly anymore. In politics, both sides are doing this. Don't vote R because this will happen. Don't vote D, this will happen.
Right.
And then when the R's get elected or the D's get elected or a combo gets elected, are we surprised that nobody trusts any of them? This isn't the way to do things. So I think there's a lot we can try to do to fix some of our political processes. And a lot of it is just going back to the Constitution. We set this up for a reason. Again, not perfect, but the legislative branch has a role to play. They need to step up and play it. The executive branch has a role to play, but that's not taking over everything.
Sure.
It's to see that the laws are faithfully executed. Where do those laws come from? From Congress.
Right.
So, you need to put these things in play. And the role of the courts, this isn't stopping what the people want. The role of the courts is to say, is what you're doing, Mr. President or Congress or governor or whoever, is what you're doing constitutional? And, we set this system up, again, not as a perfect system, but as the best one we could come up with.
When it comes to reforms and working with this, is a lack of experience in government an issue? Because you do run into situations where, let's say just with the Social Security thing, some of that in the headlines are about people 150 years old being on the Social Security rolls, when it turns out it's just a programming situation, that it isn't a real thing. That lack of understanding, that reason is very easy to figure out. But if you aren't around it or you don't know about that, then it creates a lot of confusion. So I guess, how does that perspective inside and outside the government, how important is that in all of this?
Experience makes a difference, and it's you go to a doctor, you go to a lawyer, you go to a contractor. You want somebody who's experienced. You don't, sometimes you're trying somebody new out, but you don't give them don't build the 10-story building for me if you've never built anything before. Don't do major surgery if you've never, done surgery before.
Sure.
You don't take this case to the Supreme Court if you've never had a lawsuit before. Experience counts. I mean, you always need to realize you need to be open to new ideas and new things, and that's where sometimes having outsiders come in. But the outsiders need to come in with a degree of humility and realize that they need to learn. When I got elected mayor, I had not served in an elected office before. In City of Fort Wayne, second biggest in the state, and big budget, a lot of employees. But I had been around local government before, and I intentionally, I beat an incumbent, but I intentionally kept one of his top people, a few of his top people around because I wanted their background and experience. And sometimes the problems I got were the people I brought in who took the the axe to something when they should have been taking the scalpel to things, and I had to call them back. I mean, we had to learn first. It's a complicated, any organization is complicated. So experience is a good thing to have, but we the people need to try to figure things out more too. I mean, bumper stickers don't give you solutions or answers to what's going on. You need to learn more. I'm concerned with the death or the near death of local media in so many places. Where do people go to get their news? You can't just turn on your social media feed and just read the headline or read the meme and take that as gospel. And it's just it's so frustrating. I mean, it's a great way to access a lot of things quickly, but look into it. The other day I saw somebody posted something about the Ukrainian Zelensky, and how he's got all this money and wealth, and basically accusing him of stealing stuff. And somebody in response, said, according to Snopes, this is not true. They've checked all the property records, blah, blah, blah. And then the person's response was, well, Snopes is a liberal organization. Nobody asked, where did the person who posted the meme get their information from? They just posted it because that sounded interesting. And if everybody would have to give some site, the Snopes says this, but I've got this source legitimate who says the opposite, okay, then I can, do further research. But people just want to put something out there without thinking, without researching, without oftentimes reading the article. You read a headline and you think it's going to say something, and turns out it was from 5 years ago.
Right. We get out of this recording and you get a phone call. It says, Paul, we want you to come and run this Department of Government Efficiency. You say, yep, well, do it. How are you going about trying to find savings for taxpayers' money without disrupting services to a large extent?
Now, what I'm going to want is to go to every agency, every department, and tell them, tell me what you're doing, tell me why you're doing it, tell me how you could cut X percent. Try to do this within, the next X number of days, weeks, maybe a month, whatever type thing, or at least get me the upper level things quickly. And then I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to have other folks with me that have worked in that department before, or academics who have studied that before, or folks that have partnered with that before. And we're going to question you to see whether that makes sense. And if we think you could go further, we're going to push you to go further. If we think you're close to where you're going to be, we're going to be fine with that. But go through agency by agency, and then I'm going to take those recommendations and I'm going to send them to our elected officials in Congress and said, you set this agency up, you gave it this level of funding, we think you can reduce this level of funding because of X, Y, Z.
Right.
Or we think you need to restructure the agency or give it some different focus by doing ABC. And I go back to the elected officials after I've had a chance for the folks that actually do this on a day-by-day basis look at it. I mean, what's still shocking to me, it's, I helped host a session with the mayor of Terre Haute, the mayor of Noblesville, and they've in Terre Haute there are 38 former federal employees who have been fired within the last week. There's a federal prison in Terre Haute. They've been let go. I mean, this is I know people in AID. I know people that have been getting Fulbright grants. I know people. All of it. You don't just cut things off in the middle. That's when you waste things. That's when you're inefficient. And even with my 5% approach, I admit that's not the best approach to start with, because I've always argued, why should we, if someone is trim and is happy with their body weight, I shouldn't ask them to drop 5% when who needs to lose any, in getting the same goal.
Yeah.
The person who's underweight should have a different goal than the person who's overweight. Yeah. And the same thing with government. The agency that's getting more than it needs, they can cut. The agency that has been operating on fumes, they probably need to be beefed up if we think it's an important function.
Yeah. Well, your experience and expertise in this is absolutely invaluable. I can't thank you enough for joining me to talk about this.
Okay. Enjoy talking about this. Thanks, Ken.
Well, that's all the time we have today on the O'Neill Speaks. O'Neill Speaks is the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. All opinions and comments on O'Neill Speaks belong to the host and guest of the O'Neill School and don't necessarily reflect those of the school itself. Music for O'Neill Speaks is by Manos Mars. Be sure to subscribe to O'Neill Speaks on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcatcher app so you don't miss an episode. We're out of time, but for now, and for the O'Neill School, I'm Ken Bykoff saying thanks for listening, everybody.